In Trust, Chris Hammer creates a microcosm of secrets, scandal, and skullduggery enmeshed in the threat of constant violence. In his hands, Sydney becomes a city of shadows, a place where menace lies around every corner and dark intentions brew within every building. A malevolent cabal has spread long tendrils of corruption through every facet of the New South Wales government, and veteran newspaperman Martin Scarsden is determined to expose it. Welcome to the Potts Point Bookshop, Chris. How are you today?
Good, Simon. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. What can you tell us about your third book starring Martin Scarsden?
Well, it is the third in the series. It's a follow-up to Scrublands and Silver. That said, though, you can read it totally as a standalone. A couple of people have had and really liked it and have then wanted to go back and read the previous books. This is a bit different in that, well, it's set in a real place, Sydney, although as you kind of alluded to, it's an imagined Sydney. It's certainly not the tourist Sydney of the Opera House and the harbour and Bondi Beach. Another big difference is it has much more about Martin's partner, Mandalay or Mandy Blonde, to the extent that we get her point of view as well. The first two books are told very much from Martin's point of view. He's in every scene, you can read what he thinks. You only have his impressions of what other people are thinking. In Trust, you alternate chapters, more or less, one from Martin's point of view, one from Mandy's. So you get to see what she's thinking, her impressions of Martin, and that almost inadvertently picks up the pace of the book because, you know, you can't tell an entire day from Martin's point of view and then go back and start it again with Mandy. I mean, I guess you could, but I haven't. So the chapters are shorter. You got two storylines, at least two storylines going, so it bounces around a lot. And I think that it kind of picks the momentum of the book up. So it's possibly a little bit more of a thriller than a just a straight crime book. And I was really happy with that because I think it kind of works. You know, it could have gone all bung, but it works. And the story is Sydney, you know, is a real place as opposed to the previous book. So I guess that's a change up too.
Absolutely, yeah. So when it comes to actually plotting a book like Trust with the two sort of storylines, how did you map that out at all? Or were you just sort of writing by the seat of your pants, or was it very much sort of mapped out in your mind or on a piece of paper, or however you plot your books?
I'm not a huge plotter. I wish I was more of a plotter because it sounds like it'd be easier to do. Look, I started with an idea of Mandy. What was Mandy's history? Because in Scrublands, we meet the two of them and we realise they're quite damaged and we learn quite a bit about Mandy's childhood. In Silver, we go back to Martin's hometown and we really learn what traumatised him as a child. And I found those kind of emotional stories, the emotional journey of the major characters in the books, satisfying, and I think a lot of readers did as well. So it's just not a mechanical crime story. You're invested in the characters.
For sure.
But as I was writing Silver, I realised there was this big gap in Mandy's backstory. We know she grew up and went to school in the town that's in Scrublands, and we know that she returned there maybe 10 years later when she was 28. So I was thinking, well, what happened to her in those 10 years? And it just seemed natural to me, you know, a young woman fleeing a country town would not go to another country town, but would go to a big city.
Yeah.
So and already as I was finishing Silver, the story was starting to bubble away. So there's a little snippets of stories that are in Silver that are continued, if you like, in Trust. You know, nothing so important that you can't read it as a standalone. But definitely, you know, if you've read Silver, you go, "Oh, that was what that was all about."
Yeah,
yeah.
When you wrote Scrublands, did you have any idea you'd be writing a third book starring Martin and Mandalay, or was it sort of like you might have wanted to, but it's sort of you just focused on writing this standalone novel that could potentially extend beyond?
Look, I did and I didn't. I initially had this kind of mad idea to write a trilogy, as in not a series of 3 books as we've got now, but a real trilogy with storylines continuing right over. And it was pointed out to me very early in the piece that you can't do that with a crime book. If you've got a murder, you've got to tell the reader who did it or what, by the end of the book, like, duh. So once I realized that, all I did was concentrate on Scrublands, trying to get it good enough to be published, essentially. But there were a few ideas bubbling on.
Yeah.
And because, as I said, almost surprisingly, I got that emotional story there, so that Martin in Scrublands evolves during the telling of the story. So he's different by the end of the book than he was at the start. I thought there is more to tell here. There's more to this character. And then writing Silver, I was thinking there's more to Mandy's character. So the idea of doing more than one book, I think it was always kind of there, but it evolved over time.
Sure. Does that mean ideas for a fourth book starring these characters are sort of percolating in the back of your mind now, or are there other characters in your future? What do you think is, where do you think you're headed next?
Yeah, there are. One of the problems of putting an emphasis on that emotional journey is there's a limit to how much you can do it, how much their backstories are. If you have a really dispassionate, disconnected protagonist, like a Miss Marple or a Poirot, you can kind of go forever.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking at this stage the next book might be more standalone. It might be in the same universe, by which I mean contemporary Australia, but including some of the characters that we've met in the book. So it's like some of the police officers or the ASIO officer, and maybe with Martin and Mandy in the book, but as minor characters.
That's what I think.
Not having their point of view. So
yeah,
I'm kind of thinking I might expand like that at the moment. It's more thought bubbles than anything. So let's see if we're back next year, Simon, and what we're talking about.
Well, Michael Connelly does that so well. Obviously, he's got his Harry Bosch series, which is the sort of standout series, but then you've got the Mickey Haller and his Jack McAvoy sort of journalist storylines too, and the characters often feature in each other's novels, and Bosch might be the protagonist of one, and Mickey might be the protagonist of another, but it's very cool as a reader dipping in and out of these books and seeing characters that you've seen in earlier volumes, earlier books.
I really like that about Michael Connelly's books, and I remember as a kid I really loved that when I read Tintin books. Sometimes you just have these minor characters reappearing time after time. I always found that really good fun.
It makes you feel like such an insider too, if you recognize that, like, a character appearing where a new reader might not, and it sort of makes it feel like you're sort of in a secret club with the author, maybe, you're so invested in their world.
Yeah, but I do think whatever I write next, Simon, will be kind of contemporary Australia, in that kind of universe, and probably in a somewhat similar style.
Yeah. What was it like writing about, like you say, a real world, like a real city like Sydney? Obviously, its darkness and corruptness perhaps exaggerated more than Sydney really is. But obviously in Scrublands and Sylvia, dealing with fictional places, was there any sort of difference in terms of writing that to write a real place?
Well, only in that there are some restrictions. You can't put in another harbour crossing or something like that. You've got to keep it real to the Sydney it is. Now there's imagined places in the book, mainly people's houses where people live, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if you think about the books that you read set in real places, say New York, London, none of them describe the same city or even the real city. New York, it's everything from Bonfire of the Vanity to Breakfast at Tiffany's to Sex in the City, whatever. They're all different takes on a real place. So strangely, it didn't feel that different to making up places like Riversend and Port Silver. Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny sort of when you read a lot of fiction, especially crime fiction, you sort of portraits of these cities are painted in your mind because you're reading sort of all these heinous acts taking place in New York City, and every writer has sort of different interpretation, a different take on these cities, and then you actually visit it for yourself and you sort of realize that it's not that the authors have lied in their books, but it's just their perspective, their take. It's just very interesting, I think.
Yeah, if you're writing a comedy, you're going to take a different take than some sort of grim murder mystery.
Yeah, yeah. So this book, Trust, was this written sort of during the whole COVID pandemic? Have you been sort of locked down writing, or was it written before the lockdown?
It was pretty much written before. So COVID was just emerging as I was finishing the manuscript and starting the editing process. And then it came up as the editors had it, and I was reflecting on what I'd written. What about COVID that was getting bigger and bigger? Could I totally ignore it? And one of the problems and certainly ignoring it would be an option. I think some writers might be doing that at the moment, and I don't think it's a huge problem. The problem with Trust, though, is there were references to bushfires, that have occurred the previous summer, and there's smoke in the air of Sydney. So I thought, bit weird to be referencing one sort of disaster, if you like, and not referencing an even bigger disaster.
Yeah.
So what I decided was I'd move there's no dates specified. It's just the book happens kind of around now. The only thing that really is that it's winter and not summer.
Yeah.
So I just shifted it. So there's a couple of references to COVID, but it's like COVID's in the recent past.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's set kind of winter next year when COVID's gone. So let's hope that COVID has gone by then. I know, and this is a problem for a number of writers. I interviewed Michael Robotham about his new book, When She Was Good.
Yeah.
And the first two lines in that book are May 2020. And of course, the May 2020 he describes. And I said, did you consider changing? And he said he did. He thought about it. But because the time frame of the book has to reflect the time frame in previous books,
yeah,
he thought it better off just to keep it, not try and fudge it. I read another book recently that's coming out next year that's deals with it really well. You've got this entire story. This guy's not sure whether he's still got a job, and at the end, his boss says, "Look, I think we might have to keep you on. We need you. We're getting stories from China about some new infection." And so then at the end of the book, we went, so this is just set last year.
Yeah,
it's like really clever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep wondering who are going to write the sort of the great, the COVID books, the mysteries set around this time, which is very fascinating right now. I think writing crime fiction, especially, we're in a world that's full of sort of CCTV and things like that. And now suddenly with COVID, we're signing in everywhere. It just makes it a very interesting sort of world now for the crime writer trying to create, realistic situations where their antagonists can sort of sneak around.
I think that's right. I think there'll be some really good books that come out of this period. I feel like I can't write them because I've been pretty fortunate living in Canberra as I do. We're not so affected. I think the good books in Australia may come out of Melbourne. And even then, how do we compete with, say, New York or London or somewhere that's really has been slammed by it? So I think I'm going to have to pass on that.
Yeah. I do like what you did in Trust, sort of referencing it without actually sort of dealing with it heavily, just sort of sprinkling the background of the virus without, necessarily. Yeah, I think it's just very cleverly done. I think you don't want to shoehorn it in, because once you mention it fully, I think you have to actually go into it a lot more, which sort of derails from the pace of the plot.
And the other thing too is, yes, I mean it's not relevant to the plot.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is, so I'm revising it in February, March as the editing started. I had no idea what the world was going to be like now in October when the book's published, let alone say next year. So it's pretty fraught trying to guess what will happen, right?
In terms of writing, have you been writing, I suppose, I don't know, has Canberra been locked down in the same way that Sydney has or Melbourne has, in terms of, did you have that period where, things, you couldn't go out, essentially, you couldn't go?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much nationwide at the start there.
True,
we've been very fortunate. We haven't had any COVID for, I think 2 or 3 months now.
Yeah.
Our borders have been open, but because we haven't had so much international quarantine here, we've been fairly safe. So now life is pretty normal. I'm actually going to be able to have a kind of physical event at the ANU.
Amazing.
With limited numbers, but we're still able to have it. When that real lockdown period happened back, whenever that was, March, April, I was right in the middle of edits and whatever. So I would have been isolated anyway.
Anyway, yeah, I was going to ask, yeah.
So no, I've been pretty fortunate, and I've been able to get to Sydney a couple of times and the coast and out to the country, and I was even able to get down to Victoria and get my son out just as the lockdown was happening there.
Yeah.
So I don't feel as if I've been too constrained. Just now with the book coming out, it would have been nice to move around, meet people in person, of course. But I think I've gotten off very lightly.
Yeah. So you're doing a lot of, I know, blog tours and things like that for Trust. You're looking forward to sort of interacting with perhaps I suppose a different kind of crowd than you normally would?
Yeah, look, it'll be interesting for sure. I'm doing quite a lot of Zoom events like this.
Yeah.
Either one-on-one interviews or, with a group of people, so readers can ask questions. So there's a whole bunch of those. There's a blog tour, which, it's individual kind of book bloggers and Instagrammers, bookstagrammers.
Yeah.
Who on any given day will emphasize trust, if you like, and have giveaways and whatever. So yeah, I'm actually quite intrigued by all of that.
Absolutely,
and I'm interested to see how it will go.
That's the amazing thing about that sort of blogosphere, the Bookstagram crowd, that, these readers have such, it's such a tight-knit community, people sharing their love of books, but the audience that they can reach too, I think, is extraordinary. I always think of reviews in like the newspapers and things like that, which are obviously very important, but it's in the world now, it's amazing how these bookstagrammers who might not be in the publishing industry or the book industry at all, but how they're just passionate readers and how extensive their reach is and how they can excite other readers too. It's an amazing thing, I think. Yeah.
Particularly, I think in some genre, it's like crime fiction, because there's people, as you know, Simon, who just love crime reading.
Yeah. So to wrap things up, before I let you go and carry on with your tour for Trust, have you been reading anything lately from any writers you admire? Any amazing crime novels that you'd recommend for our viewers today?
A couple of Australian, New Zealand ones. The Girl in the Mirror, which is a New Zealand writer.
Rose Carlyle, I think.
Yeah, that's right, Rose Carlyle. And it's a thriller, but it's got a bit of a light touch. It's like highly entertaining. It's almost like it doesn't take itself too seriously. So it's lots of fun and like a genuine page turner. And The Mother Fault by Kate Mildenhall.
I love that book.
And it's a bit different. It's set in the near future. It's dystopian. It combines a kind of crime thriller story with kind of the domestic hassles of a mother with two young and not always so obedient kids. And it's got some really fine writing in it too. You get some thrillers that have great stories and great pace, but the actual words on the page may not be so brilliant, but Kate's really got a great style. So that's a couple of recent ones, Yeah,
it's such an amazing genre blend to that book, I think. Yeah, sort of you've got the sort of literary writing in places, but also, the pace of a real page turner. It's amazing.
And an emotional story, emotional journey as well, which is something that appeals to me.
Yeah, well, I think Trust is a bit like that too. I think, obviously you have the pace of the thriller, but I think some of the descriptions of the landscape in Sydney especially, and some of the characters, the way you go in depth into them and sort of explore their backgrounds, I think not a lot of crime writers actually, necessarily do that. So I think you're sort of, I mean, I love Trust. I've loved all your books, and I think it's amazing that each book seems to be better than the next. So I'm looking forward to whatever comes next. Yeah.
Yeah, me too, right?
Chris, it was lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.